told us we were safe. They lied. In 2055, when the toxic air became too much to bear and the ecological collapse was nearly complete, our leaders unveiled their grand solution. Skynet, a colossal atmospheric dome designed to shield us from deadly radiation and purify our poisoned skies. Billions in military technology diverted to this final, desperate gambit for human survival. Scientists promised it would save us. Politicians swore it was infallible. The wealthy elite reassured us from their protected enclaves that this engineering marvel would restore our dying planet. But what if the greatest threat to humanity isn't coming from above, but from below? While the world fixated on Skynet's construction, something crashed in a remote region designated as Zone B16. Something alien, something alive, something that's spreading faster than we can comprehend. The authorities are desperate to keep it contained, but I've seen the classified reports. This organism they're calling Pandora is evolving at an impossible rate, consuming everything in its path, from abandoned hospitals to our most advanced military robots. Here's what they don't want you to know. Pandora might be our last hope. Yes, it's destroying infrastructure and causing panic, but it's also doing something Skynet never could, healing our atmosphere in days instead of decades. The question isn't whether we can stop it, but whether we should. I'm about to share the untold story of Captain Tyler Hayes and his team, soldiers sent on what was supposed to be a simple mission to eliminate the alien threat. What they uncovered, instead, was a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of command, orchestrated by Major General Shan Li himself. A conspiracy that could determine whether humanity faces extinction or evolution. The year 2055 dawned not with hope, but with desperate gasps for clean air. Humanity's once proud civilization teetered on the brink of an ecological collapse that no one could have predicted would arrive so swiftly. Military technology, once our greatest achievement, had become our undoing. The skies, once blue and inviting, now churned with toxic air that burned the lungs and stung the eyes. Children born in this era would never know what it meant to breathe freely under an open sky. Instead, they huddled in hermetically sealed habitats, learning about clouds and rain from old videos that seemed more like fantasy than history. Yet even in this darkest hour, humanity refused to surrender. It was, after all, our stubborn resilience that had carried us through ice ages, plagues, and our own self-destructive tendencies. Skynet isn't just another military project, General Hartman announced to the assembled world leaders, his weathered face displayed on screens across what remained of civilization. It's our last chance. Unlike its fictional namesake from centuries-old entertainment, this Skynet wasn't designed to destroy humanity, but to save it. A massive atmospheric filtration system spanning the upper atmosphere, it represented the most ambitious engineering project in human history. Scientists promised it would gradually cleanse the toxic air, allowing Earth to heal from decades of warfare that had scorched continents and poisoned oceans. The system utilized revolutionary technology that could, theoretically, reverse the environmental damage within a generation. The price tag was astronomical, but what value could you place on the future of your species? The construction of Skynet began in earnest, with aerospace engineers working alongside climatologists and military specialists. Hundreds of satellites were launched, forming an invisible shield that would gradually purify our poisoned skies. For the first time in decades, people allowed themselves to hope. Children in underground schools drew pictures of blue skies they'd never seen, dreaming of a future where they might stand under open heaven without protective gear. The stock markets, or what remained of them, surged as corporations pivoted to environmental restoration technologies. Even the warring factions that had torn the planet apart agreed to a fragile ceasefire. After all, what was the point of fighting for territory on a dead planet? Meanwhile, in a classified laboratory beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Eliza Chen studied the latest atmospheric data with growing concern. "These readings can't be right," she muttered, running the simulation for the third time. The results were consistent, but impossible. Skynet was working too well. The atmosphere was purifying at a rate that defied their models. Something was accelerating the process, something unaccounted for in their calculations. Her colleague, Dr. Ramirez, suggested a malfunction in the monitoring equipment, but Chen wasn't convinced. "We need to look beyond our systems," she insisted. "Something else is happening up there." Little did they know that an event was unfolding that would render their concerns simultaneously trivial and prophetic. It came without warning, a meteorite blazing across the night sky, its trajectory placing it on a collision course with Zone B16, a sparsely populated region in what was once called the Australian outback. Military satellites tracked its descent, calculating that it was too small to cause significant damage. A non-event, the automated systems concluded, not even worth waking the commanding officers. The object crashed with minimal impact, embedding itself in the red earth of the outback. For 3 days, it lay dormant, unremarkable, except to the few automated monitoring systems that registered a slight temperature anomaly. On the 4th day, something stirred within the impact crater, something alive, something that had traveled across the void of space to find a new home, something that would change everything. The first reports were dismissed as hallucinations or equipment malfunctions, plants growing at impossible speeds, spreading outward from the impact site like ripples in a pond. Vibrant green life erupting from soil that had been dead for decades. Military drones dispatched to investigate returned footage that stunned the scientific community. Verdant growth spreading across the barren landscape, consuming everything in its path. The alien organism, quickly dubbed Pandora by the media, displayed properties that defied terrestrial biology. It consumed toxins from the air and soil, metabolizing them into oxygen and nutrients. In its wake, the atmosphere cleared, readings showing dramatic reductions in pollutants. It's doing what would have taken Skynet decades to accomplish, one scientist marveled during an emergency briefing, but it's doing it in days. But Pandora's gift came with a price that became increasingly apparent as the alien organism spread beyond containment zones. Its growth was not merely rapid, it was exponential and seemingly unstoppable. It devoured buildings, vehicles, and infrastructure with the same efficiency it processed toxins. Military robots deployed to establish fire breaks were engulfed and broken down into component elements. Evacuation orders were issued for settlements in Pandora's projected path, creating waves of ecological refugees that strained already limited resources. And beneath the surface of this growing crisis, another concern took root in military and scientific circles. If Pandora rendered Skynet obsolete, what would become of the power structures that had been built around humanity's greatest engineering achievement? The race to understand and control the alien organism became the most crucial scientific endeavor in human history, with the fate of civilization hanging in the balance as Pandora's tendrils reached ever outward, promising either salvation or extinction. The discovery of Pandora sparked what might have been the most contentious scientific debate in human history. Military leaders from around the globe gathered in the last remaining United Nations complex, a fortified bunker beneath the ruins of Geneva. The air in the conference room was thick with tension as holographic displays showed the alien organism's unstoppable advance across the Australian continent. "Look at these numbers," exclaimed Dr. Yashiro, her finger tracing the atmospheric readings. "Pandora is purifying our toxic air 50 times faster than Skynet ever could. In 3 weeks, it's reversed ecological damage that we projected would take decades to address." Her eyes, bright with excitement, swept across the room of grim-faced generals and politicians. She couldn't understand their reluctance to embrace what she saw as humanity's salvation, a scientific breakthrough that had literally fallen from the sky. Major General Shan Li rose from his seat, his weathered face betraying nothing of the turmoil within. As Skynet's chief military overseer, he had devoted 15 years of his life to the atmospheric restoration project. "And at what cost, Doctor?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. "This alien organism isn't some gift from the cosmos. It's consuming everything in its path. Buildings, infrastructure, military equipment. Nothing is spared." He tapped his datapad, and the holographic display shifted to show the remains of a military outpost on the edge of Zone B16. What had once been an advanced installation was now little more than a skeleton of metal being slowly devoured by shimmering green growth. Those were experimental military robots worth billions, destroyed in hours. Left unsaid was his greater concern. If Pandora rendered Skynet obsolete, what would become of the power and funding Lee had worked so carefully to consolidate under his command? Dr. Chan, a soft-spoken virologist who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke up. "There may be a way to control Pandora without destroying it," she suggested, her voice barely audible over the heated debate. The room gradually fell silent as she continued. "My team has isolated 2 viral strains that appear to affect the alien organism's growth patterns. We're calling them P7 and N9. Her fingers danced across her tablet, sending new data to the central display. P7 appears to slow Pandora's metabolism, while N9 can potentially induce a dormant state similar to hibernation in Earth organisms. The implications hung in the air like a promise or a threat, depending on one's perspective. If Pandora could be controlled rather than eradicated, humanity might harness its extraordinary purification abilities without surrendering to its destructive growth. "That still doesn't solve our immediate problem," countered a European general, his accent thick with frustration. "While your scientists play with petri dishes, this alien thing is consuming our civilization. We need to bomb it back to whatever hell it came from." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the military contingent. But Dr. Chan wasn't finished. She nodded to a colleague who had been waiting by the door. Dr. Elijah Nakamura entered, carrying what appeared to be a modified rifle. "This is what we've been developing in response to the crisis," he announced. "We call them genome bullets, designed to deliver a targeted viral payload directly into Pandora's cellular structure." The weapon gleamed under the harsh lights. AI, marriage of military technology and cutting-edge science that represented humanity's best hope for controlling the alien threat. The demonstration was arranged for the following day at a secure facility on the outskirts of what had once been Melbourne. Pandora's advance had been temporarily slowed by natural barriers, giving the scientists a narrow window to test their creation. Major General Lee watched with barely concealed skepticism as Dr. Nakamura loaded the specialized weapon with glowing blue ammunition. "Each genome bullet contains billions of encapsulated viral particles," explained the scientist, "protected by a biodegradable casing that dissolves upon impact with Pandora's unique cellular structure." The test subject was a small sample of the alien organism, growing rapidly in a sealed chamber. The bullet struck with precision, bursting into a fine mist that settled over the writhing green mass. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then gradually, the frantic movement slowed. Within an hour, the sample had entered a dormant state, still alive, but no longer growing or consuming. "Imagine deploying this on a global scale," Dr. Chan said excitedly, as the military officials murmured among themselves. "We could control Pandora's growth, directing it to areas most in need of atmospheric cleansing while protecting our remaining infrastructure. It's the perfect symbiosis of human ingenuity and alien biology." Her enthusiasm was infectious, spreading through the civilian scientists like wildfire. Even some military leaders seemed convinced, nodding thoughtfully as they considered the possibilities. But Major General Lee remained stone-faced, his mind racing with calculations that had nothing to do with environmental restoration. If Pandora could be controlled and Skynet became redundant, the power structure he had carefully cultivated would collapse. Billions in military funding would be redirected to civilian projects. His influence would wane. The future he had envisioned for himself would evaporate like morning dew in the harsh light of this new reality. As the delegates departed, their transport vehicles kicking up dust on the parched earth, Lee lingered behind. He approached Dr. Chan under the pretense of asking additional questions about the genome technology. "Your work is impressive, Doctor," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "But I wonder about the delivery system. How do you propose to disperse these genome bullets across the entire affected area?" As Chan eagerly explained their plans for aerial deployment using specialized aircraft, Lee nodded attentively, but his thoughts were elsewhere, calculating angles and opportunities, weighing risks against rewards. By the time he boarded his private military transport, a plan was already forming in his mind. If Pandora couldn't be destroyed entirely, perhaps the mission to control it could be sabotaged, creating chaos that would necessitate Skynet's continuation. It was a dangerous gambit, one that would put countless lives at risk. But for a man who had risen through the ranks during endless wars and environmental catastrophes, moral compromises were simply the currency of power. As his aircraft lifted into the toxic air that Skynet was supposedly purifying, Lee made a decision that would alter the course of humanity's struggle for survival. The tarmac shimmered under the harsh sun as Captain Tyler Hayes performed his final equipment check. The specialized aircraft, codenamed Falcons, stood ready, their sleek bodies modified to withstand the corrosive atmosphere of 2055. Designed as the military's answer to navigating the toxic air that had become Earth's new normal, the Falcons represented the pinnacle of aeronautical technology. Tyler's breath fogged his mask as he looked across at his team, 20 of the best pilots and genome specialists the military had left. "Remember," he called through the comms, "this isn't just another mission. Plan B is already on the table." He didn't need to elaborate. Everyone knew what Plan B entailed: the systematic bombing of Pandora's growth zones, regardless of civilian casualties. The unspoken weight of thousands of lives pressed down on their shoulders, heavier than the specialized gear they wore to protect themselves from the alien organism's spores. "Falcon Squadron, you are cleared for takeoff." The voice of Colonel A. Tan crackled through the comms as the pilots climbed into their cockpits. Tyler settled into the familiar embrace of his seat, the neural interface humming to life as it synchronized with his thoughts. The genome bullets, humanity's last best hope, were secured in specialized compartments, their blue glow visible through reinforced glass. "Stay focused, stay alive," he reminded his team as engines roared to life across the tarmac. One by one, the Falcons rose into the sky, their trajectories plotting an intercept course with Pandora's advancing edge. Through the specialized filters of his visor, Tyler could see the distant horizon where healthy blue sky met the sickly yellow-green of the toxic atmosphere. Somewhere beyond that boundary, Pandora continued its relentless advance, simultaneously healing and destroying their world. The first sign of trouble came 3 hours into the mission. "Captain, I'm picking up anomalous weather patterns ahead," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez, her voice tight with concern. Tyler accessed the shared data stream, frowning at the readings. Massive storm systems were forming along Pandora's growth perimeter, conditions that hadn't been present during their morning briefing. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, checking and rechecking the atmospheric sensors. The storms had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, directly in their flight path. There was something unnatural about their formation, too sudden, too synchronized. A chilling thought struck him. Was Pandora somehow responding to their approach? The alien organism had already demonstrated abilities that defied terrestrial biology. What if it could also sense threats and react accordingly? "Adjust formation," he ordered, "and prepare for turbulence. We're going through." Inside the central command bunker, thousands of kilometers away, Lucy Chen monitored the mission with growing anxiety. Her role as communications specialist meant she was the lifeline between the squadron and home base, but it also meant she was powerless to do anything but listen as the situation deteriorated. "They're flying blind into those storms," she whispered to her colleague, Connor Riley. His hand found hers beneath the console, a brief squeeze of reassurance that violated at least 3 protocols on professional conduct. But in a world teetering on the edge of extinction, such rules seemed increasingly irrelevant. "Tyler's the best pilot we have," Connor reminded her, his Irish accent thickening as it always did under stress. "If anyone can get through this, it's him." Left unspoken was the reality they both understood. Their relationship had blossomed in the shadow of apocalypse, each day possibly their last, making their connection both more precious and more tenuous. The Falcons hit the storm wall like insects striking a windshield. Violent updrafts sent the aircraft spinning, while lightning strikes illuminated the clouds in eerie, pulsating patterns. "Maintain formation," Tyler shouted over the comms, fighting. to keep his own Falcon stable as systems flickered and warning lights blazed across his console. Through gaps in the churning clouds, he caught glimpses of something impossible. The storm itself seemed to be reaching for them, tendrils of vapor, coalescing into almost solid forms that grasped at the aircraft. "Evasive maneuvers," he ordered, banking hard to avoid a massive tendril that materialized directly in his path. Around him, the formation splintered as each pilot fought their own desperate battle against elements that seemed determined to destroy them. 3 blips vanished from his tactical display in quick succession, each representing a Falcon and its crew, gone without even time for a distress call. As they broke through the storm's edge, the survivors found themselves face to face with Pandora itself. The alien growth stretched to the horizon, a rippling ocean of iridescent green that seemed to pulse with an inner light. It was beautiful in its alien way, and terrifying in its implications. "Deploy genome bullets on my mark," Tyler instructed, bringing his Falcon into a controlled descent. The specialized delivery system required them to fly dangerously close to Pandora's surface, where the bullets could be released in a precise pattern to ensure maximum coverage. The remaining Falcons fell into formation behind him, their pilots silent with concentration. None of them voiced the fear that gripped their hearts. What if the bullets didn't work? What if this was a suicide mission? The alternative, returning home in failure, knowing that Plan B would be implemented, was unthinkable. 3, 2, 1, mark, Tyler counted down, his finger hovering over the release mechanism. The first wave of genome bullets descended upon Pandora like technological rain, bursting into fine mist upon impact. For a breathtaking moment, it seemed to be working. The alien organism's frantic growth visibly slowed in the treated areas, its vibrant color dimming to a muted green. "It's working!" someone shouted over the comms, the relief in their voice palpable. Then, without warning, alarms blared across Tyler's console. "Captain, we've got incoming!" Lieutenant Petrov's voice cracked with panic. "Military signatures, our own tech." Tyler's blood ran cold as he checked his tactical display. Squadrons of combat drones were converging on their position, weapons hot and locked on the Falcons. These weren't just any drones. They were the latest T-8 military robots, supposedly secured at bases thousands of kilometers away. Someone had activated them remotely, someone with high-level military access, and directed them to attack the mission. As the first missile streaked toward his aircraft, Tyler had time for only one thought. This was no accident. This was sabotage. The sky erupted in chaos as the Falcons engaged in desperate evasive maneuvers. "Break formation," Tyler ordered, pushing his aircraft into a steep climb to avoid the incoming fire. "Use the storm for cover." The irony wasn't lost on him, seeking protection in the very phenomenon that had nearly destroyed them minutes earlier. Behind him, Falcon 7 erupted in a ball of flame as a missile found its mark, the debris raining down onto Pandora's waiting embrace. Through the tactical chaos, Tyler spotted a larger aircraft approaching from the east. The Orca, a massive transport carrying the second wave of genome specialists and their equipment. It was flying straight into an ambush. "Orca, abort approach!" he shouted into the comms. "Hostile drones in the area, I repeat, abort approach!" But either his warning wasn't received, or it came too late. The transport's massive silhouette lit up with multiple explosions, its broken body tumbling from the sky in a graceful, terrible arc. As emergency beacons activated across his tactical display, Tyler made a decision that would alter the course of the mission and perhaps humanity's future. "All surviving units," he transmitted, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "We're going to ground. Rendezvous at coordinates being transmitted now." The mission to save humanity had just become a desperate fight for survival, with an unknown enemy pulling the strings. From his secure command center, Major General Shan Li watched with grim satisfaction as chaos unfolded across his multiple screens. The Orca's destruction had been regrettable, but necessary, a calculated sacrifice to protect the future he envisioned. His fingers danced across the neural interface, directing the military robots with the precision of a conductor leading a deadly orchestra. "Sir," his aide ventured nervously, "Central Command is demanding an explanation for the drone activation." They're saying the authorization codes were yours. Lee didn't bother turning around. Tell them it's a system malfunction, possible virus infection in the command protocols. The lie flowed easily. In a world where technology frequently failed, such explanations were rarely questioned. Besides, by the time anyone discovered the truth, it would be too late. The mission would fail, Plan B would be implemented, and amid the chaos and destruction, Skynet would remain humanity's only viable hope for survival in 2055. His position, his power, his vision for the future, all would be secured. Meanwhile, Captain Tyler Hayes and the survivors of Falcon Squadron had made a harrowing descent through Pandora's outer growth zone. Their landing had been anything but smooth. 3 more Falcons lost to the combination of alien tendrils and malfunctioning systems. The remaining pilots and genome specialists, 12 in all, gathered in the shadow of their damaged aircraft. "Comms are down," reported Lieutenant Rodriguez, frustration evident in her voice despite the mask that covered half her face. "Someone's jamming all frequencies except short-range tactical." Tyler nodded, unsurprised. Whoever had sent those military robots to attack them wouldn't want them calling for help. He surveyed their surroundings. They had landed in what had once been a suburban area, now transformed by Pandora's relentless growth. Skeletal buildings poked through the alien vegetation like the remains of a drowned civilization, which, in many ways, they were. "There," he decided, pointing to a structure that had suffered less damage than most. "That looks like it might have been a hospital. We'll set up there, establish a defensive perimeter, and figure out our next move." The journey to the abandoned hospital was a nightmare of alien terrain and toxic air. Pandora's growth had transformed the landscape into something both beautiful and terrifying. Familiar human structures now serving as mere scaffolding for the alien organism's artistic destruction. Every step had to be carefully considered. Certain variants of the growth reacted violently to human presence, while others remained eerily passive. "It's almost like it's testing us," muttered Dr. Keller, one of the genome specialists. "Learning our weaknesses, adapting to our presence." No one wanted to contemplate the implications of an intelligent alien organism capable of strategic thought. They had enough problems without adding sentient plant life to the list. As they approached the hospital's main entrance, Tyler held up his hand, signaling the group to stop. "Something's not right," he whispered, his enhanced senses, a military technology breakthrough from the endless wars, detecting minute vibrations in the air. "We're not alone." The attack came without warning. Creatures erupting from beneath Pandora's growth, their forms a nightmarish fusion of the alien organism and what might once have been local wildlife. "Mutants!" someone screamed, the word almost lost in the sudden barrage of weapons fire. Tyler's training took over, his body moving on autopilot as he positioned himself between the creatures and the civilians. "Defensive formation!" he shouted, his rifle spitting genome-modified bullets that seemed to have limited effect on these secondary manifestations of Pandora's influence. Around him, the squadron fought with the desperate energy of those who knew retreat meant death. Dr. Keller fell first, his screams cutting off abruptly as one of the creatures dragged him beneath the undulating surface of Pandora's growth. Lieutenant Petrov was next, his armor no match for the acidic secretions that ate through to the flesh beneath. In the chaos, Tyler saw their group fragmenting, panic overriding training as the horror of their situation became clear. "Inside now," Tyler ordered, grabbing Dr. Narayan, their lead genome specialist, and physically shoving her toward the hospital entrance. The survivors stumbled through the doors, sealing them behind with emergency welding equipment from their survival gear. The sounds of the creatures scrabbling at the barriers filled the darkness, punctuated by the labored breathing of the traumatized group. "Lights!" Tyler commanded, and one by one, helmet-mounted illumination systems activated, revealing their sanctuary. The hospital's interior had been largely spared from Pandora's influence, protected by its sealed environment, and possibly by materials in its construction that the alien organism found unpalatable. But the respite it offered came with its own horrors. Evidence of the final days before evacuation was everywhere. Medical equipment still stood ready for patients who had either fled or perished. Personal belongings lay scattered where they had been dropped in haste. And on some walls, desperate messages had been scrawled to loved ones who would likely never see them. "We can't stay here," Lieutenant Rodriguez stated the obvious, her voice hollow with exhaustion and fear. "Those things will find a way in eventually, and our oxygen supplies won't last forever." She was right, of course. Their specialized gear, designed for the aerial mission, included limited air filtration systems to protect against Pandora's spores, but these were temporary measures at best. "We're not giving up," Tyler responded, his determination a physical force in the gloomy space. "The genome bullets work. We saw that before the attack. We just need to find a way to deploy what we have left and get that information back to base." He didn't mention his growing suspicion about who might be behind the sabotage. Without proof, accusations against someone as powerful as Major General Lee would be worse than useless. They would be suicidal. But the precision of the attack, the specific targeting of their mission, pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of their plans and the authority to redirect military assets. As the survivors established a makeshift command center in what had once been an emergency room, the first cracks in their unity began to show. "This is insane," Dr. Weber snapped, his German accent thickening with stress. "We should be focusing on finding a way to call for extraction, not continuing a mission that has clearly been compromised." Others murmured in agreement, fear masquerading as pragmatism. Tyler understood their perspective. They were scientists, not soldiers, and they had just witnessed horrors beyond their training or experience. But he also knew that if they abandoned the mission, Plan B would be implemented, resulting in the deaths of thousands. "Listen to me," he said, his voice cutting through the rising tide of dissent. "Someone wants this mission to fail, someone powerful enough to turn our own technology against us. I don't know why, and right now it doesn't matter. What matters is that we still have a job to do, and we're the only ones who can do it. So yes, we'll try to establish communications. Yes, we'll look for a way out. But we will not abandon our mission." In the tense silence that followed, something changed. In the atmosphere, a subtle shift in the dynamics of their group. Some straightened their shoulders, finding reserves of courage they hadn't known they possessed. Others withdrew into themselves, already calculating their own odds of survival separate from the group. Tyler had seen this before in combat situations. The moment when a unit either cohered into something greater than the sum of its parts, or fragmented into individuals united only by proximity. He was about to speak again when a new sound penetrated their sanctuary. Not the organic scrabbling of the mutant creatures, but the rhythmic, mechanical sound of military robots approaching. "They found us," Rodriguez whispered unnecessarily. Tyler moved to the nearest window, carefully peering through the filthy glass. What he saw sent ice through his veins. Advancing through Pandora's growth with mechanical precision were humanoid figures, the latest generation of combat androids, each one a lethal combination of artificial intelligence and weaponry. And leading them, clearly visible on a floating command platform, was a figure that confirmed Tyler's worst suspicions. "It's Lee," he confirmed, turning back to the group with newfound resolve hardening his features. "Major General Shan Lee is behind this, and he's coming to finish what he started." The hospital corridors echoed with the rhythmic thud of mechanical footsteps as Tyler led his team deeper into the abandoned structure. "They're designed to hunt and eliminate with extreme prejudice," he explained, his voice barely above a whisper. "Military technology at its finest or worst, depending on your perspective." Behind him, the remaining survivors moved with varying degrees of stealth and panic. Dr. Narayan clutched her portable genome synthesizer like a lifeline, her knuckles white against its metallic surface. The device, about the size of an old-world laptop, represented their only hope of completing the mission. If they could modify the remaining genome bullets to account for Pandora's apparent evolution, they might still have a chance. "These robots," Rodriguez asked, checking the ammunition in her sidearm. "Any weaknesses we should know about?" Tyler's laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. "Nothing that helps us with our current resources. The T8 models were designed to operate in toxic environments, Their systems are sealed against corrosives, radiation, and EMP weapons. In 2055, we finally created the perfect killing machine, just in time for the end of the world. The first encounter came at a junction where two corridors met at right angles. The robot, a humanoid figure of gleaming titanium alloy standing nearly 7 feet tall, stepped into view with the casual confidence of a predator that knows its prey is cornered. Its optical sensors swept the area, the red glow casting eerie shadows across the peeling hospital walls. Tyler reacted without conscious thought, years of combat training taking over, as he shoved Rodriguez and Dr. Weber into a nearby room. "Down!" he hissed to the others, as he dropped to a prone position, his rifle coming up in one fluid motion. The robot's head swiveled toward the noise, weapon systems powering up with an ominous hum. The corridor erupted in weapons fire, the robot's precision contrasting with the desperate scattered shots from the survivors. Tyler's bullets sparked uselessly against the machine's armor plating, each impact a reminder of their technological disadvantage. Then, unexpectedly, the robot staggered. One of Rodriguez's shots had found a gap in the armor, damaging a mobility actuator. "The joints!" Tyler shouted. "Target the joints!" The second and third robots arrived as they were still dealing with the first, transforming the narrow corridor into a killing zone. Dr. Weber fell, his body nearly cut in half by concentrated fire. Private Jackson followed moments later, her final act a desperate throw that lodged a fragmentation grenade in the first robot's partially exposed internal mechanisms. The resulting explosion destroyed the machine, but also collapsed part of the corridor, temporarily blocking the advance of its companions. "We can't win this way," Tyler decided, gathering the shaken survivors. "We need to change tactics, find another approach." Dr. Narayan, her face streaked with grime and tears, looked up from Weber's body. "I have an idea," she said, her voice steadier than Tyler would have expected. "These robots are military technology, right? Designed to target and eliminate human threats?" When Tyler nodded, she continued, "But what about non-human threats? What about Pandora itself?" The plan was audacious, borderline suicidal, but it represented their best chance. Using Dr. Narayan's expertise, they modified several genome bullets to create what she termed a hyper-growth catalyst, essentially the opposite of their original mission. When deployed, it would trigger an accelerated growth spurt in Pandora, creating chaos that might confuse the robot's targeting systems. "It's temporarily trading one enemy for another," Narayan admitted, as she worked feverishly to recalibrate the microscopic delivery mechanisms. "But Pandora isn't actively hunting us. These robots are." Tyler watched her work, a new respect growing for this civilian scientist who had found courage in the crucible of combat. "How long before the effects wear off?" he asked, already calculating extraction routes. "Theoretically, about 30 minutes, she replied, not looking up from her delicate adjustments. "After that, the viruses will begin competing, and the N9 strain should eventually predominate, returning Pandora to a more dormant state." "Theoretically," she repeated, emphasis revealing the experimental nature of their desperate gambit. The modified bullets worked better than they had dared hope. Released through ventilation shafts that connected to the exterior, the catalyst triggered a frenzy of growth that burst through windows and doors, engulfing the hospital's lower floors in a writhing mass of alien vegetation. The robots, programmed to prioritize human targets, found their sensors overwhelmed by the sudden biological explosion. Their attempt to adapt to the new threat created precious minutes for Tyler's team to move to the hospital's emergency vehicle. "There!" Tyler pointed to a massive shape under a tarpaulin, partially protected from Pandora's influence by the specialized construction of the bay. Pulling back the covering revealed an older model armored medical transport, a relic from the early ecological wars, designed to move patients through hostile environments. "If we can get this running," he said, already moving toward the driver's compartment, "we might have a chance to break through their perimeter." The armored vehicle roared to life with surprising eagerness, its fusion engine apparently unaffected by years of disuse. "Everyone in now," Tyler ordered, taking the controls while Rodriguez manned the rudimentary weapons system. a defensive measure originally designed to clear debris, but potentially useful against pursuing robots. The transport burst from the emergency bay in a shower of broken concrete and twisted metal, its reinforced hull plowing through the lower density areas of Pandora's growth. Behind them, the hospital was now almost completely engulfed, the hypergrowth catalyst continuing its work with terrifying efficiency. Through the transport's specialized viewing ports, they could see the robots attempting to disengage from the alien organism, their movements becoming increasingly erratic as Pandora's tendrils infiltrated their joints and access panels. "It's actually feeding on them," Dr. Narayan observed with scientific detachment that barely masked her horror. "The alloys, the power sources. Pandora is adapting to consume technology now." Their momentary advantage evaporated as a massive shape detached itself from the swirling toxic clouds above. "Enigma," Tyler breathed, recognizing the distinctive silhouette of the military's most advanced combat drone. Unlike the humanoid robots, Enigma was designed for environmental warfare, a fusion of aircraft and mechanical spider, its 8 articulated limbs ending in various weapons and sampling devices. Originally created to collect data from the most toxic regions of Earth's atmosphere, it had been repurposed as an instrument of war during the final conflicts before the ecological collapse of 2055. Now it descended toward them like an avenging angel, its systems apparently under Lee's control. "Hold on!" Tyler shouted, throwing the transport into a series of evasive maneuvers that strained its civilian design parameters. Enigma responded with precision, each movement calculated to cut off their escape routes, herding them toward a dense growth of Pandora that would trap the vehicle. The battle that followed would later be described by Dr. Narayan, the only one, to maintain a functional recording device, as humanity's ingenuity versus its own technological hubris. Enigma attacked relentlessly, its advanced systems predicting and countering Tyler's increasingly desperate evasive tactics. The transport's armor, designed to withstand environmental hazards rather than military weapons, began to fail under the assault. Inside, the survivors were thrown against restraints and each other as Tyler pushed the vehicle beyond its design limitations. Rodriguez managed to score several hits with the debris cannon, but Enigma's self-repair systems quickly sealed the damage. It seemed inevitable that the drone would eventually wear them down, until Tyler spotted a potential advantage, a section of Pandora's growth that exhibited the distinctive blue-green coloration indicating high metallic content absorption. "It's been feeding on technology," he realized aloud, "which means it might be particularly attracted to something as complex as Enigma." In a maneuver that violated every protocol in the military driver's handbook, Tyler reversed direction, charging directly at the massive drone. Enigma, its attack algorithms momentarily confused by the unexpected tactic, hesitated just long enough for Tyler to implement his desperate plan. At the last possible moment, he veered away, using the transport's remaining momentum to dislodge a massive section of the metallic-infused Pandora growth. The alien organism, sensing the complex technology of Enigma hovering above, reached upward with unnaturally accelerated growth, enveloping 2 of the drone's articulated limbs before its systems could respond. What followed was a grotesque battle between technology and alien biology, Enigma's weapons firing indiscriminately as it attempted to free itself, while Pandora's growth continued to spread across its surface, seeking entry points to the rich resources within. Tyler didn't wait to see the outcome, using the distraction to push the damaged transport clear of the immediate battle zone. Behind them, Enigma's systems emitted a final electronic scream as Pandora breached its core processors, the sound cutting off abruptly as the drone crashed to the Earth, already being consumed by the very planetary infection it had been hunting. Colonel Elena Tan stood before the holographic display, her weathered face illuminated by the pulsing red of emergency protocols. Around her, Central Command buzzed with the controlled chaos of an operation on the brink of failure. "Still no communication from the Falcon Squadron or the Orca," reported her communications officer, tension evident in every syllable. Tan nodded, having expected nothing else. The military technology monitoring systems had registered multiple losses before all signals went dark, a catastrophic failure by any metric. Now, as 2055 threatened to be humanity's final chapter, she faced the most difficult decision of her career. Plan B sat before her, a simple command sequence that would launch a barrage of high-altitude bombs designed to create a toxic firebreak around Pandora's growth zone. The ecological impact would be devastating, essentially sacrificing thousands of square kilometers and any civilians who couldn't be evacuated in time. But measured against the potential extinction of humanity, such calculations took on a grim necessity. "Madam, we've received new data from the perimeter sensors," announced a young lieutenant, his uniform still crisp despite the hours of crisis management. "Pandora's growth rate has accelerated by 12% in the last hour. At this rate, it will reach the eastern settlement zone in less than 12 hours. The news sent a ripple of dismay through the command center. The eastern settlement housed over 30,000 civilians, refugees from the ecological collapse who had nowhere else to go. Evacuation would be impossible in the time frame available. The weight of those lives pressed down on Tan's shoulders like a physical burden. "What? About the genomic approach?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "With the mission team presumed lost, we have no way to deploy the genome bullets effectively," responded Dr. Maruyama, the civilian scientific liaison. "The aerial dispersal system was unique to the Falcon aircraft. Without it, we have no delivery mechanism that can cover sufficient area." The silence that followed was broken by the harsh buzz of Tan's priority communicator. "Colonel," came the voice of General Williams, her superior and the architect of Plan B. "The Security Council is demanding an update. What's your status?" Tan straightened her spine, years of military discipline asserting themselves even in this moment of crisis. "Sir, I'm preparing to implement Plan B. All other options appear to have been exhausted." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, each syllable representing countless lives she was effectively condemning. There was a pause on the other end of the line then. "Understood, Colonel. For what it's worth, I believe it's the right call. How long do you need?" Tan glanced at the tactical display, calculating distances and deployment times. 3 hours to position the bomber squadron for optimal coverage. After that, she didn't need to finish the sentence. After that, there would be no turning back. Once the toxic bombing began, the environmental damage would be irreversible, creating a dead zone that might persist for generations. As Colonel Tan issued the preliminary orders for Plan B, her mind wrestled with doubts that she couldn't afford to voice. Something about the mission's failure didn't sit right with her. The simultaneous loss of communications, the precise targeting of both the Falcon Squadron and the Orca support craft. It suggested coordination and intent rather than unfortunate coincidence. "Lieutenant Park," she called, gesturing to a young officer monitoring the drone feeds. "Replay the last transmissions from Captain Hayes before communications were lost." The footage flickered to life on her private screen, showing chaotic glimpses of aerial combat and what appeared to be military robots engaging the Falcon Squadron. "Freeze that frame," she ordered, her blood running cold as she recognized the distinctive silhouette of Enigma, a drone that should have been securely docked at Central Base under Major General Lee's command. "Get me everything we have on Major General Lee's movements in the last 48 hours, she instructed quietly, "and keep it between us for now." In the damaged transport, now limping across the Pandoran landscape, Tyler assessed their dwindling resources with grim pragmatism. Fuel reserves were critically low, medical supplies nearly exhausted, and their oxygen filtration systems operating at minimal efficiency. The victory over Enigma had cost them dearly. The transport's armor was compromised in multiple locations, and of the original 12 survivors, only 5 remained. Dr. Narayan worked feverishly at her portable station, modifying the remaining genome bullets to account for Pandora's evolution. "Even if we perfect the formula," she admitted without looking up from her work, "we still face the problem of distribution. The original plan required an aerial deployment system that we no longer have access to." Tyler nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. Their options were narrowing by the minute, a fact underscored by the military-grade chronometer on his wrist, a gift from his father before the ecological wars claimed him. According to his calculations, They had less than 3 hours before Colonel Tan would be forced to implement Plan B. "I might have a solution to our distribution problem," offered Rodriguez, her voice rough from the toxic air that had seeped through her damaged mask. She pointed to a topographical feature on their navigation system, an isolated mountain rising from the relatively flat landscape ahead. "If we can reach that elevation and manually release the genome bullets, the prevailing winds might carry the viral agents across a significant portion of the growth zone." It was a desperate plan, relying on meteorological conditions that were unpredictable at best, but it represented their only chance to avoid the implementation of Plan B. Tyler studied the navigation system, calculating distances and travel times. "We'll need to push the transport beyond safety parameters," he concluded. "And even then, it's going to be close." The unspoken question hung in the air between them. Was it worth risking their lives on such a slim chance of success? Or should they focus on their own survival? The answer came from an unexpected source, Private Jenkins, who had barely spoken since the hospital battle. "My family lives in the Eastern Settlement," he said simply. 3 hours isn't enough time for evacuation." As the transport ground its way up the increasingly steep terrain, Tyler established intermittent communication with Colonel Tan, using a jury-rigged system that Dr. Narayan had assembled from salvaged parts. The connection was tenuous, breaking up every few seconds, but it was enough to convey their desperate plan and the evidence of sabotage. "We need more time, Colonel," Tyler urged, his voice fighting through layers of static. "The genome approach can work. We've seen it in action. But we need to reach the dispersal point." On the other end of the connection, Tan was silent for so long that Tyler feared they'd lost her. When she finally responded, her voice was tight with suppressed emotion. "I can give you 1 hour, Captain, not a minute more. After that, I have my orders." The connection dissolved into static before Tyler could respond, leaving him staring at the mountain peak that now represented humanity's last best hope. Behind them, the damaged transport left a trail of vital fluids and broken components, its systems failing by increments as they pushed it beyond its design parameters. The final ascent was a nightmare of technical failures and physical exhaustion. The transport gave out 2/3 of the way up the mountain, its fusion engine emitting a final protesting whine before shutting down completely. "We continue on foot," Tyler decided, helping Dr. Narayan secure the precious genome bullets in a portable container. The climb was brutal, made worse by their damaged equipment and the thin, toxic air that found its way through their compromised filtration systems. Jenkins collapsed first, his lungs finally surrendering to the pollution they had been fighting for years. "Leave me," he gasped, pressing his sidearm into Rodriguez's hand. "Just stop them from bombing the settlement." They had no choice but to continue, each step a battle against gravity and their own failing bodies. Rodriguez fell next, 100 meters from the summit, her legs simply refusing to carry her further. Unlike Jenkins, she was still breathing, so they propped her against a rock formation, promising to return, a promise they all knew might be impossible to keep. Only Tyler and Dr. Narayan reached the summit, emerging onto a plateau swept by winds that seemed to howl with the voices of a dying planet. Far below, Pandora's growth stretched to the horizon, its alien beauty belying its destructive potential. In the opposite direction, barely visible through the toxic haze, lay the Eastern Settlement, thousands of lives hanging in the balance. "We have 17 minutes before Colonel Tan initiates Plan B," Tyler noted, checking his chronometer as Dr. Narayan prepared the dispersal device. Her hands, steady through firefights and the horror of mutant attacks, now trembled with the weight of responsibility. "What if it doesn't work?" she whispered, giving voice to the fear that had accompanied them up the mountain. "What if we've come all this way for nothing?" Tyler had no comforting lies to offer, no military platitudes that could ease the burden of this moment. Instead, he placed his hand over hers on the release mechanism, a simple human connection in the face of overwhelming odds. "Then we'll have tried," he said simply. "Sometimes that's all we can do." Together, they activated the device, sending the modified genome bullets spiraling into the air, carried by winds that would determine the fate of civilization. As they watched the invisible particles disperse, Tyler's chronometer counted down the final minutes before humanity would be forced to implement Plan B, a decision that would shape the future of a world balanced on the knife edge between salvation and destruction. The world held its breath as the minutes ticked by, each second weighted with the fate of civilization. In Central Command, Colonel Tan's finger hovered over the authorization panel for Plan B, her duty and conscience waging a silent war within her. The bomber squadron circled at high altitude, their deadly payloads ready to deliver environmental devastation in the name of survival. Military technology had brought humanity to this precipice, both the ecological collapse of 2055 and the means by which they now sought to avert extinction. Tan's gaze flicked between her chronometer and the atmospheric sensors monitoring Pandora's advance. The deadline she had given Captain Hayes had passed 40 seconds ago, but something made her hesitate. A soldier's intuition honed through. Decades of combat, or perhaps simply the desperate hope that another option might yet emerge from the chaos. "Colonel, we're picking up anomalous readings from the Pandora growth zone," announced her sensor officer, confusion evident in his voice. The main display shifted to show real-time data from the monitoring drones that circled the alien organism's perimeter. Growth rate is decreasing, now stalling completely. A murmur rippled through the command center as additional data poured in, confirming the initial readings. Pandora's relentless advance had stopped, the first pause since its emergence from the meteorite impact site. "Get me visual confirmation," Tan ordered, scarcely daring to hope. The display shifted again, showing high-resolution imagery of Pandora's leading edge. Where minutes before there had been frantic movement, a ceaseless reaching for new territory to consume, now there was stillness. The alien growth hadn't died, its unearthly colors still pulsed with internal activity, but it had stopped expanding. The genome bullets, dispersed by the mountain winds, appeared to be working. "Doctor." Chan burst into her laboratory, startling the team of scientists who had been working around the clock to develop alternatives to the genome approach. "Look at this," she exclaimed, transferring data from her portable device to the main display. The screen filled with microscopic imagery of Pandora's cellular structure, captured by drones equipped with specialized sampling equipment. The N9 virus is spreading through the organism's network exactly as we predicted. The images showed the alien cells entering a dormant state as the virus replicated within them, passing through the interconnected structure with remarkable efficiency. "It's working faster than our most optimistic models suggested," she continued, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "The genome bullets must have been modified to account for Pandora's evolution, something we hadn't fully incorporated into our original formula." In the mountains above the growth zone, Tyler helped Dr. Narayan navigate the treacherous descent. They had retrieved Rodriguez from where they'd left her, finding her weak but conscious, her specialized military training having given her body the resilience to survive exposure that would have killed a civilian. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the wind that whipped around them. Tyler nodded, pointing to the distant expanse of Pandora. Even from their elevation, the change was visible. The constant rippling movement that had characterized the alien organism had ceased, replaced by a strange stillness that seemed almost contemplative. "We did it," he confirmed, allowing himself a moment of relief before refocusing on the immediate challenge of getting them off the mountain alive. Their communication equipment was damaged beyond repair, leaving them isolated from Central Command. They had no way of knowing if Colonel Tan had received the sensor data in time to abort Plan B, or if the bombers were even now approaching their position. The arrest of Major General Shan Li was conducted with the precision and discretion befitting his rank, if not his actions. Special Forces operators secured his private command center, while he was still directing resources to hunt down the survivors of the Falcon Squadron. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded as Colonel Tan entered, flanked by military police. His outrage might have been convincing had Tan not already uncovered the trail of evidence linking him to the sabotage of the mission. "You've endangered not just the mission but potentially all of humanity," she stated, her voice level despite the anger simmering beneath. "For what? To maintain your position? To keep Skynet relevant when a better solution presented itself?" Lee's expression hardened, his justifications dying unspoken as he recognized the futility of denial. As he was led away, Tan couldn't help, wondering how many other leaders throughout history had made similar calculations, sacrificing the many to preserve the privilege of the few. 3 days after what was already being called the Pandora intervention, Dr. Chan presented her findings to an emergency session of the Global Science Council. The data from both the mountain dispersal and subsequent monitoring painted a compelling picture. "Pandora hasn't been destroyed," she emphasized, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "It's been domesticated." The term caused a stir among the assembled scientists and government representatives. Chan continued, undeterred. "The modified genome approach has induced the organism into a stable dormant state that still allows it to perform its remarkable atmospheric purification functions without the uncontrolled growth that threatened our infrastructure." On the massive display behind her, comparative atmospheric readings showed dramatic improvements in air quality across regions adjacent to Pandora's territory. In effect, we've turned an existential threat into a powerful ally in our fight against the ecological collapse. And with continued research, we believe we can develop methods to direct its growth into specific areas most in need of environmental restoration. The reunion between Tyler and Lucy took place in a military hospital, where he and the other survivors were being treated for exposure to toxic air and various injuries sustained during their ordeal. Her face was the first thing he saw upon waking from surgery to repair internal damage caused by breathing unfiltered air during their mountain ascent. "You're the stubbornest man I've ever met," she informed him, her attempt at sternness undermined by the tears in her eyes. "Next time you decide to save the world, maybe try to come back with fewer holes in you." He managed a weak smile, still too groggy from medication to form a clever response. Beside his bed, Connor stood awkwardly, clearly uncertain of his place in this reunion. "The Irish lad kept me sane while you were off playing hero," Lucy explained, reaching out to take Connor's hand. "Turns out he's pretty good in a crisis." The simple gesture conveyed volumes about relationships formed under extreme pressure, about the human connections that flourished even at the edge of apocalypse. Tyler nodded, finding that the complex emotions the scene might once have triggered were overridden by a simpler feeling: gratitude that they had all survived to navigate such wonderfully ordinary complications. 6 months after the Pandora intervention, humanity stood at a crossroads unlike any in its turbulent history. The alien organism, now carefully managed through targeted application of the genome viruses, had become an integral part of Earth's recovery. Vast areas once rendered uninhabitable by the toxic air of 2055 were gradually being reclaimed as Pandora's purification capabilities were harnessed and directed. Cities began to emerge from their sealed environments, citizens experiencing direct sunlight and natural air for the first time in years. The military technology that had brought them to the brink of disaster was being repurposed for environmental restoration, with robots originally designed for warfare now cultivating and monitoring Pandora growth zones. The scientific breakthrough represented by the modified genome approach had spawned entirely new fields of research, with applications extending far beyond environmental remediation. But perhaps most significantly, the shared crisis had forced humanity to confront fundamental questions about leadership, priorities, and the future they wished to create from the ashes of ecological collapse. On a clear autumn day, Tyler stood on a hillside overlooking what had once been the edge of Pandora's growth zone. The alien organism, now a controlled part of the landscape, had transformed the once barren terrain into something new. Neither fully terrestrial nor alien, but a hybrid that represented humanity's adaptability in the face of unprecedented challenges. Dr. Narayan, recovered from her injuries and now leading the Pandora integration project, stood beside him, making notes on her tablet as they observed the latest controlled expansion. "It's beautiful in its way," she remarked, looking up from her data. "Terrifying, yes, but beautiful nonetheless." Tyler nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Pandora, like humanity itself, contained the capacity for both destruction and creation, its power determined by how it was guided and used. As the sun began to set over the transformed landscape, casting the hybrid ecosystem in golden light, Tyler found himself thinking not of the past they had narrowly escaped, but of the future they were now free to build. a civilization recovering, not just from ecological collapse, but from the mindsets that had brought them to the brink. The meteorite that had carried Pandora to Earth had been random chance, a cosmic accident that might have ended humanity. Instead, through courage, sacrifice, and the stubborn refusal to surrender to either external threats or human failings, it had become the catalyst for a new beginning. As darkness fell, and the bioluminescent elements of Pandora began to glow with their ethereal light, Tyler allowed himself to believe that perhaps this time, humanity would get it right. And there you have it, the incredible story of how humanity faced extinction twice over, first from our own technological hubris, and then from an alien organism that could have consumed our world. But instead of destruction, we found redemption in the most unexpected place. Was Pandora truly a cosmic accident? Or was there something more to that meteorite's perfectly timed arrival in 2055? Some military reports suggest anomalies in its trajectory that couldn't be explained by natural space phenomena. And what about those mysterious genetic properties that made it so perfectly adaptable to Earth's atmosphere? If you found this tale of human resilience fascinating, you're going to be absolutely blown away by what's coming up next. The video, appearing on your screen right now, explores an even more mind-bending possibility. The underwater civilizations discovered in 2059 that might have been monitoring humanity's struggle all along. Did they have something to do with Pandora's arrival? Click now to find out the shocking truth that military technology experts and environmental scientists have been keeping classified for years. What would you have done in Captain Tyler's position? Would you have risked everything to stop Plan B, or would you have followed Major General Shan Li's approach and sacrificed parts of the world to save the rest? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm fascinated to hear which side you're on in this ethical dilemma. The ecological collapse of 2055 might seem like science fiction, but how far are we really from facing similar challenges today? Hit that subscribe button and activate notifications so you never miss our weekly deep dives into the scientific breakthroughs and environmental threats that could reshape our future. Next week, we're exploring the genetic bullets technology that's currently being developed at top-secret military labs around the world. Trust me, you don't want to miss this one. Remember, knowledge is power, especially when the future of our civilization hangs in the balance. Subscribe now and join our community of truth seekers who aren't afraid to ask the questions others won't.